Okay, we're live. We're here.
We did
So
it.
we're here for the book launch of Food for Thought by Ariana. Oh my gosh, Ferrante.
Yep.
Ferrante.
We're Heather and Steve from Bridget's Gates Press, and Ariana, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Like they said, my name is Ariana Ferrante. I am a graduate student studying screenwriting. I primarily write horror and fantasy, usually young adult, but sometimes I kind of foray into the adult market, usually for short stories and novelettes like this one.
Awesome.
Great. MJ, tell us about you and tell us what you've got out and what you got cooking.
Okay. Well, I am a freelance editor. I edit everything that Bridget's Gate lets me edit, as well as some other stuff. I have a book out. It's called Epic of Valentia. So I'm with the camera. It's also so I'm also an author and a writer. And what I got cooking, that's about it. I'm just trying to write stuff, and that's it.
That's plenty. Louise, how about you?
I'm Louise Monroe, and I primarily write poetry and short prose pieces, usually around sacred nature, fantasy, mythology, those kind of things. Most recently had a piece that was in Bridget's Sisters, and so very excited about that, and just still writing. We're writing.
And Bridget's Sisters is an art book, and it's the art of Elizabeth Leggett, who also happens to be the one who did the cover for Food for Thought.
Yeah.
So
And
music. So the music. So
And this one.
and that one.
No.
Seriously,
They're very good.
We love Elizabeth.
Yes. So usually we start this by talking about how this manuscript got greenlit, and this is our first novelette. Right now, it's our only novelette. And we were a little nervous about length, and how to market and sell a novelette versus a collection or a novella, but we decided to do it. And it's because my mother is the narrator of most of the tales in my head. And it's because she read to us so much when we were children growing up, and we were merciless listeners. Like, she could have strep throat and be croaking away, and we'd be like, keep reading until blood pours out of your mouth. I mean, we were horrible, horrible children. But she read to us all the time. And so often when I fall in love with a story, I can tell that I've really started to grok the story and fall in love with it when the narrator in the voice in my head becomes my mother's voice instead of my own. And so here's this one, and Ariana, you'll recognize it. No one came to Lemos for kindness. She dealt only in cruelty, conversed only with the terrible and the desperate. No kind man wished another to starve, and no kind man came to demand favors from the goddess of famine to ensure that wish came true. Only the worst of mortals sought her aid. So, for those of you who don't know yet, those are the opening lines of Food for Thought. Yeah. So, that was it for me. I told Steve and Clyde that this was the winner, and Steve goes, I thought we were concerned about the length, and I'm like, I'm not. And so that was it for us. So my first story, so this is a Greek myth retelling told in a way I've never seen done before. And I have never, and listen, I can't proclaim to be like the great Greek scholar of ancient myths, but I've never seen Lemos roped into the Demeter Persephone cycle before. So I was intrigued immediately. And she's a goddess that doesn't really get a lot of play in American Western culture. Like, if you pick up any Greek book, she's probably not mentioned. Even in the big goddess and heroes books, she's really not mentioned. And so this story is really, I mean, I tell people this story is really a love story. And it's a love story you had no idea you were even looking for. And, but it's also kind of a story of devastation and horror. Because Lemos, I'm just going to say her name differently every time I say it, in the hopes that one day I land it. One of these will be correct. Lemos?
Yes.
Lemos. Os?
Accent on
Lemos.
the first syllable.
I don't think so. But she's a terrible, I mean, she's a terrible bird. You know, the goddess of starvation and famine and all bad hunger things and death from hunger. Like, she's not the goddess of rainbows and sunshine and butterflies. So Ariana, what
You don't invite her over for dinner.
you don't invite her over for dinner because it'd probably spoil on the table. So what was your inspiration for this story? Like, what happened first? Was it her first, or were you thinking of the Demeter Persephone cycle and then thought of her? Do you remember?
It was definitely her first. She was, because I know a lot of people have appeared at the reviews. I know a lot of people like, I've never even heard of this person before. And I'm like, me neither. But especially because I was a huge fan of Greek mythology ever since I was a kid. There was this huge, like, I remember it was like this big, a book of like just drawings for children and stuff. And I had never heard of this Lemos character until like I went on one of like those late night Wikipedia dives. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is really cool. I've never heard of this person. And there was the aspect of like, obviously her and Demeter are like polar opposites. They're not supposed to, they can't talk to each other because they're like so polar opposites. And I was like, well, what if they were forced to talk to each other? What would be like the catalyst for that? And I was like, oh, well, Demeter has the whole thing with Persephone. And I felt like it would be a very easy thing to link of like, what would be the problem that she felt like she had to turn to someone to that like no one else would understand.
Right. That she would need help for. And so I mean, it fits so well together. Like when I first read the whole manuscript, I was like, how has this not been done before? Like in all of the thousands of years of our history. Oh, look at the doggos. How is it that this, because she's the death of crops. You know, she's the end of a planting cycle and a harvest cycle. Like and when you think about Demeter's deep dive into grief and how she just like aways all life in the breadbasket and all fruit and all crops, I just found myself thinking, what?
No.
How could these two not be forever linked? And I love how you bring in the fates, you know, because not even the gods could escape the fates of ancient Greece. Right. And so I love the part where it's like the fates have determined they cannot meet. They can't be in the same space. You know, forget it. There always have to be opposites because they're polar opposite goddesses. And I just think, I mean, first of all, I'm a big fan of anytime somebody tries to basically jump the fates, especially in the Greek mythology when they're just like, we'll see. So I loved that aspect of it. But then tell me, what made you want to make it a sapphic love story versus they just get together and she helps Demeter in some way? What made it a love story for you?
I think what made it a love story for me was it kind of came almost immediately after, like, it was so quickly, they have to work together. I'm like, oh, but what if they like fell in love? And another, I think for me, it was the question of like intimacy, the prerequisite of like the closeness of working together. I just felt like a stronger relationship formed from that.
Yeah. And there's a lot of immediate intimacy I think it's established early because Demeter's coming because she's heartbroken over her missing child. And, you know, there's an intimacy that's immediately established when there's that kind of trauma. Like the trauma is so big, it's bigger than you. It's so big that you're destroying the earth, you know, piece by piece. And so there's kind of an immediacy of bond that I think actually truly happens among people with trauma. You know, when somebody is in this high trauma space and they reach out to somebody else who has just the right amount of empathy or the right amount of, I can listen to this, there's a quick bond formed. So I think it's very realistic. This whole thing, I mean, I know it's a Greek retelling, but it
Well,
feels so real
Well,
to me.
and touching on what you just said, I think some of the best love stories, romances come when you haven't necessarily planned that from the beginning, when it just flows naturally
Right.
from the story. You start connecting with the characters as you're writing, and then, yeah, this is where it's going.
Right. This is a
Yeah.
natural step.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it felt through the book. So I wondered if it started as a love story in your head or if that's what the characters became. So it kind of leads me to ask, when you wrote this story, I know writers talk all the time about being plotters or pantsers. And, you know, like, do they outline it out? Do they have their character notes? Or do they just kind of wing it? So when you were writing Food for Thought, did you have it all plotted out ahead of time? Or was it just kind of, let's see where the characters go? Let's just write a few sentences and see how it goes.
I think for a lot of my work, I usually have the skeleton down. I like to think I'm a pantser, but I'm really not. I like to have an outline, even if it's very vague. And for retelling in particular, you know, you're like, you got to get these beats in to make it like feel like a retelling, though you can kind of like wander off a little bit because you can't just do the same story again. That'd be boring. But sometimes you're outlining and you're following your outline, and then suddenly you're like, ooh, wouldn't this be really cool? And I just kind of let that take me where it may. But for the most part, and especially for Food for Thought, I did have like the skeleton down, and I followed almost all of it.
Okay.
So that leads me to talk about, because I should have done this when we began, the reason we have Louise and MJ on is MJ's not only the editor of Food for Thought, but all three of these authors were also in Muses of the Musings, a Greek anthology. We did, do you remember when? Spring? Last year? This year?
No, last year. Using of the Muses would have come out, in
the spring of last
March
year?
or April.
So not so good with the time here. But
Sorry.
April 2022.
thank you for having it in front of you. Yeah. So that leads me to ask this. So in the short story that you wrote, Ariana, for Musings of the Muses, did you have an outline of what you wanted, or did you just pants it all the way? Pantser it all the way?
For that one, I think I pantsed it a lot more, where I had the basic thought of like Arachne gets revenge on the Greek gods in her own way after being turned into a spider. But I think the general like plot of that was kind of like, I had the concept and I just kind of started writing down and saw where that took me.
And MJ, what about you and your story for Muses of the Musings? Did you plot it out, or was it pantsing all the way?
That's a really good question. I had it in my head, like what elements I think could have actually happened, and then just kind of like got twisted as history went on, as time went on. Mm-hmm. I think I mostly pantsed it. Like Ariana said, like you have the beats that you want to hit, like, you know, the earth swallowing up the children, the stone that he mistakes as Zeus, you know, all those, like you have the beats that you want to hit, but I think I mostly pantsed that one.
And what about you, Louise? You wrote a poetry piece.
Sacrifice to Hestia.
Yeah.
I had an idea that I wanted, if you look at it structurally, there's 3 separate sections of it. And I think before I even had decided that it would visually be broken up that way, that I really wanted it to begin sounding as if I was speaking in ancient times, or that as if I was sort of hearkening back to a time. But I knew that ultimately the sort of memo or message was very modern and personal for me. So as I was looking at it again, it really sort of feels like that I set the scene by thinking of Hestia's space and time in the way backs, and then came through this sort of traveling to where this is here and now of modernizing it. So it was mostly advanced, but I understood that I needed to go from way back to current.
Past and future.
Yeah.
So here's my question. Why Greek myths? I mean, there's a huge Greek story, Greek myth resurgence right now that's very popular. And somebody said to me, where were we? I think when we were in Santa Fe, they're like, well, aren't you afraid that's going to get old and people won't buy it? And I said, well, no, but we're retelling stories that are over 6,000 years old. So I really don't feel like there's a big risk we're suddenly not going to be interested.
And going back all the way when we were children and even before,
right?
If you saw a movie or read a book based on mythology, it was generally going to be Greek myths more than anything else.
More than anything else, which is very interesting in an American market, I think.
So we'll start with, Ariana. Why Greek mythology as opposed to any other cultural?
I think a big part of it is just it's the one I'm most familiar with. Like I said, ever since I was a child, I was really attracted to Greek myth, and I think a lot of that is probably because it's the most accessible one. It's the most well documented. All the Renaissance people loved Greek mythology. Everybody passed it down. Mm-hmm. Whereas something that I'm really interested in Celtic mythology, but because of the Christianization of Irish culture, there was a lot of that lost, and it's a lot harder to determine certain aspects that haven't been warped through time. And I think it was just more that it was what was available to me, and it resonates with a lot of people throughout history.
That's true, because in school I don't ever remember studying Celtic myths or Norse myths.
Yeah, Norse mythology, there were books in the library.
Yeah.
But
as a school lesson. We did a whole year of the Greeks in English class.
But you're right,
middle school.
It wasn't really taught. There were books available.
Sure, you could read them.
But that was it. In Celtic mythology, I didn't know anything of it till I was an adult and started looking on my own. But yeah.
Right. I think a lot of that, you can see that when you, hold on, I just have to text Clyde and tell him that we're on a book launch so he doesn't show up in the background not dressed.
Okay. Yeah, no,
that would really infuriate him. So when I heard his phone downstairs, I was like, oh, I didn't text him and remind him.
Yeah.
But I think there is something to that. In the American public education system, there's you may do a mythology unit in a literature class, but I don't remember, I remember we read, and I'm going to age myself, listen to a record instead of a book on tape, a book on record, of both the Odyssey and the Iliad. And it was Fitzgerald's, I'm pretty sure it was Fitzgerald's Iliad. I don't remember whose Odyssey it was, but you weren't there. But literally, that's what we did my whole 7th grade year. It was all Greek myths, and those were the two big cornerstones. And then I think we did a couple plays and a couple other stories. But did you guys do Greek myths in school, in public school? Did you guys go to public school? Yeah.
I was homeschooled, but I picked up the Iliad.
How could I not have known that?
Troy, and loving the movie Troy, and it was all over from there. So I actually did have an obsession with Celtic mythology before I really got into Greek mythology. But I think part of the reason why Greek mythology has persisted so strongly is because, one, I think the Romans kind of took over the world, and at the same time brought a lot of that science and mythology and culture all spread it all over the world. And then just American, politics and our structure and everything pulls a lot of science and government and a lot of those principles
economics and politics
in ancient Greece. So I feel like it's just kind of ingrained in us that we need to make this important more so than Celtic mythology or Norse mythology.
Right.
I think one of the other reasons that we're, whether it's a resurgence now or a continuation, is that we have more women in academia now than ever before.
Yes. Yes, yes.
and more women who are translating. And so, just like Emily Wilson just put out the Iliad a few years ago, I had to look up when it came out. It was 2020. Maria Devana Headley did a translation of Beowulf. And so, for the
Right.
first time, well, or with more fanfare at least, because I think that is the first woman's translation of Beowulf. I don't think it's the first women's translation of the Iliad, but we are hearing the words through a female lens now instead of the male
And I
lens and the male gaze. And so I think that's one of the reasons that it's enticing to tell these stories over again and reimagine them,
right,
because to realize now that up until recently, we had never heard any of these stories not told by a man, no matter
right.
who the story was about.
Wilson certainly wasn't the first woman, but I will tell you this: she was the first woman to challenge the accepted
Hmm.
translation that had kind of existed for forever and forever. And there's another author that we talked on Twitter a while ago, and we were talking about, I'm trying to remember, I have to look down so I can
You
remember.
got to look up.
But we were talking about how badly our translation, how bad our translations are. And she's Greek, and she's like, "Wait, what do you mean?" And I'm like, "Wait, you've never heard this? Let me tell you how we're telling this story." And it's wildly different than the stories apparently that you grow up reading if Greek is your first language. Um,
Yeah.
and listen, the Victorians didn't really do any of us any favors. They were not good translators. And
Heavy filtering.
I mean, listen, I love them because there's a big resurgence in a lot of things that I love because of the Victorians, but man, they were not careful scholars at all. They were not careful scholars.
They had a lot of biases that they let trickle into their translations way too much.
Color everything that they did. Yeah, just a little.
Objectivity was not of interest to them too much.
It was not well regarded, objectivity. But I do think like that's one of the things, like Wilson's translation. If you guys have not read it, right after you buy Food for Thought, you should buy Wilson's translation of both the Iliad and the Odyssey, because it will absolutely blow your mind.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You can prepare.
You're muted if you're trying to talk, but yeah, it's very different from the Iliad and Odyssey you have read. Yeah.
I was just looking up who reads Emily Wilson's Audible. That's what I'm listening to. And
Good.
Here, hang on. Because her voice is, it's amazing. So, and her name is Audra McDonald. Audra McDonald. And so in my background, you were talking about learning Greek history. My undergraduate is in theater. And so I did an enormous amount of Greek theater and learning the history of Greek theater and the theater itself. And so that was where I really got steeped in Greek storytelling.
So Ariana, if you do another mythology retelling, and I'm not saying you have to, I'm just suggesting when you do.
Strongly.
Right. Will it be, do you think that you'll stick with the Greeks, or do you think you'll branch out and do somebody else?
I think there's plenty of other things that I would like to tackle in the Greek mythosphere. I actually wrote like this, apologies if you can hear my dog bark. I actually wrote this like Celtic myth based thing ages ago. It wasn't very good. I might like, at one point I might like kind of cannibalize it and like see what I can pull from that at some point. I actually wrote a Krampus related thing like last year or the year before that's like it was like a YA like retelling thing with like it was a Bluebeard retelling with a Krampus twist, which was like that was one of those things where it was like I just want to write whatever. I want to write for me. And
Right.
so I kind of like just played with strange like folkloric things and kind of melded them together. But like, yeah, I think there are stories from all over the world that I would like to look at or like draw inspiration from. I don't know about like specific stories so far that I think need a retelling, but I would keep my eye open for them.
Yeah, for the next rabbit hole goddess that nobody's heard of. I mean, listen, blows my mind. And Louise, you know this. Like when somebody shows up with a Greek goddess I haven't heard of, I'm like, wait, who? What? Stop. Everyone stop. I have to spend an hour going down a rabbit hole of who this goddess is. And like if we know her origin temples and where they were. And now I'm going to need a map of ancient Greece from 3000 BCE so I can try to figure out who she intersected with and when. Because I have to tell you, I love a good destruction goddess. And to me, there's no greater destruction than I have either, brought winter and nothing will grow, or I have brought famine and no one will eat.
Well, the historian, ancient studies person is coming out.
Right. Sorry about the rest of this book launch. It will now be about the history of famine in the ancient world.
Well, it's that even when I started reading it and I went and did a little search because I had the same thing. I was like, who is this? And please know that this was not my only stop, but I did look at Wikipedia. So
Yes,
this was not my only stop.
But that's how it starts.
Yeah.
But Wikipedia is like the rabbit hole where you're like, hold on, let me get some primary sources.
Yeah.
Well, right. This is where I was like, hold up. Sentinel of Hades? I'm sorry.
Right.
What?
And also, I'm sorry, in all of the retellings we have had of Hades and Persephone, how come she hasn't come up? Why is no one talking about her? I mean, for real. Like, this is the best. I'm just going to tell you, if she started as a 1 a.m. rabbit hole thing in your brain, best rabbit hole ever. I mean, hands down, has to win like some kind of annual rabbit hole award because really, she's so fascinating. Like, even where she lives is so fascinating. Like, it's hard to get to her. Nobody accidentally stumbles on her. There's a part in it where she's kind of crotchety about her front door. You know what I mean? Like, clearly the door's no good. She's probably going to have to get around to replacing it, but probably not. And I'm just like, who is this? Who is this person? I mean, for real. Starvation goddess getting together with the goddess of grain. I mean, to the point where I'm telling you, I mean, we all know eventually, if you know the Greek myth, Demeter gets her daughter back for half of the year. So for half the year, everything is fertile and abundant. And then for half the year, she returns to the underworld and everything is dead and dark and winter and nothing grows. And, if it's a really bad winter, people are really hungry in February before everything starts to grow again. But when I was reading this story, I was like, I don't know that Demeter's leaving. I don't know how this story is really going to wrap up and end, but I don't know if this story doesn't end with, and the Greeks all died, the end. There's no more. This was the end of their story. Because they're such a natural fit, I think. Yeah. And I think part of the appeal is how opposite their deity natures are. What did you just read? I can tell from your face you read something.
I did. And I was looking. It's the coming together and why Demeter is safe in Limos's home. It's just look at yourself, Lemos says. the response harsher than she meant it to be. Look at the world. The rain has frozen, the earth covered in vast whiteness. Nothing grows in your grief. I do not have to make you yearn, Demeter. You are already yearning. Like,
Yes.
like,
Mm,
and you, she's like, oh, if you touch me, I'll be hungry. Look at you. Like,
right. You are.
you are.
Yeah.
And I know that she's the
They get
goddess of,
each other.
right. They get each other. They
Yeah.
understand that hollow grief. And I have to say, I know that she is the goddess of grain, but for whatever reason, some reference in my head, I think it must be just the depth of summer here in Kansas is a really ripe tomato, like
Yeah.
hanging off the vine. And so when I think of Demeter, I think of a tomato that, like, if you don't pick it today, it will be rotten tomorrow. And so it is so sweet and so juicy. And so to really, I feel like her motherhood is shown in so much grief that
Yeah.
and it's about the sort of crying and weeping and gnashing of teeth, like, as opposed to this hollowed out thunkenness. And
Right. Right.
I think I hear you that it makes so much sense that they come together.
Right. So naturally.
I love that Demeter is going on strike.
Yes.
Basically.
I love it. I love it. Like, people always talk about, like, oh yeah, Achilles was the first one to go on strike. I'm like, no, it was definitely
No.
Demeter. Like, she
Yeah.
was just like, not having this. I quit. You're gonna do it.
Right.
You're gonna meet my demands, or I quit. And we'll see how far this goes. And I loved that. And I also loved that there are two women here that are, I love the spite. I love that.
Yes.
I love the grief as a mother myself, and feeling that in the pages. And I love that these two women who are polar opposites, but they're not at the same time.
Right. Right. It's like
They're
the
not
same-
at each other's throats. Like, they're not trying to one up each other or, use each other to gain favor with the gods or whatever. That's so common in Greek mythology.
Right.
I loved that they just got each other and were there for each other. And that was my favorite part, honestly. It was just, these women aren't trying to, like, get at each other. That was so refreshing to read in a Greek myth retelling. It was, yeah.
I would agree that there is a lot of that in, at least in the Americanized Greek myths that we read. The goddesses and the women in the stories are always pitted against each other. And there's always some one-upmanship in some way.
Yeah.
And
jealousy and nastiness.
Yes, it's petty and it's gross. And, it's very refreshing to read. Also, I suspect somewhere in my heart that this is, that we are reading horrible translations, because to say that there were thousands of years of pettiness among the gods, I'm like, I just don't feel like that seems even reasonable when you look at history all stretched out in thousands of years. It seems like we could have had at least one period.
You also have to look at who is keeping the bookkeeping.
Right. Right. Keeping the score.
The patriarchy is the one writing everything down.
I can't help but think that, like, this retelling, if you were maybe even anywhere but America, but certainly if you were Greek, there's perhaps nothing surprising in the support of each other and the emotional empathy they have for each other. And, maybe that's the kind of tale that you see all the time. Like, that's the part that fascinates me the most, especially in 2023, where I could literally get on a Zoom call with somebody who lives in Athens, like right now, and how different the same stories we read are based on what the original language is and how they're translated. I mean, it blows my mind that I could call somebody and we could talk about Arachne and they'd be like, I've Never even heard what you're talking about. Let me go get a book off my shelf and I'll translate it as we go. I mean, it's crazy to me how different these stories are, and how I feel like we've been lied to for hundreds of years, thousands of years. Yeah, like I feel like this is some kind of secret that we're suddenly just like rediscovering. Because the other part I really love is when Lemos sees snow for the first time. Because to me, that's really telling. She's the goddess of famine and spoiled foods and feasts that run out of food and dried up crops. And I just think, oh, interesting, right? Because this is where winter comes from. No one has seen winter, even the goddess of famine and like death and destruction of all food stores has never seen winter. And I have to think, truly, if this was going to be a retelling told by the Victorian gentleman, this would be our perfect opportunity to be like, and Lemos was jealous because Demeter invented snow and Demeter invented winter, which was the death of all crops for 6 months. You know what I mean? Like, I have to tell you, I fell into this love story so fast and so hard. I didn't even think about it until like the 4th time we were rereading it after MJ had done edits. And I was like, oh, you know what's missing? Petty Greek goddess behavior. And this would have been the perfect story to do it, because she could have been like, no, get out. I hope you never find your daughter, because you have invented the thing that is the core definition of me. Which also kind of goes back to how they're really goddesses of the same coin, just opposite sides. Because Lemos could have been the goddess of winter. She just didn't.
It's good you didn't do that already.
Right. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you stuck with the love story.
You know what else the Victorians would have done? They would have fixed Lemos.
Yes.
At the end, she would have been healed and suddenly would have been luscious with beautiful lips and hips and right?
Probably
like
long blonde hair. Yeah.
Right, because she had fallen in love with life and growth.
Right,
And
the goddess of fertility and harvest. So of course she's physically transformed into fertility and harvest. That is very true. That's how the story would have ended.
That's right. Instead of both being valid and neither one fixing either one.
Right. Did you know that, I mean, when you were writing this, Ariana, did you really dig that deep into it, or did it just happen? Because I got to tell you, I feel like we could do a whole psych class on being true to yourself and validating your own personhood just based on the ending. And Lemos being like, and I'm still the goddess of famine and destruction and hunger and starvation. I will still come for the children and the old and the meek. And she doesn't have to live happily ever after as a bounty goddess. So was it intentional, or did it just happen?
I think it just kind of happened because I think I've dealt with, like Lemos, I've dealt a lot with being like the kind of one on the fringes, like not necessarily fitting in with the others. And over time, like at the beginning, I like kind of scorned. I was really self-conscious about my own like differences. But over time, I just kind of learned to own them and like saw what they were as like strengths for myself. And I never thought for a moment that Lemos needed to change at the end, at least as far as like her true nature was concerned. Mm-hmm. I think it was important. The understanding was more important than any transformation or like trying to fix herself.
Agreed. Because there's nothing wrong with her. I mean, that's who she is. You know, she's the goddess nobody intentionally hangs out with unless they're really bad people. And I think that's why I love the opening, because all through the story, you see her ability to empathize. You see her ability to be like, hey, wow, I mean, you don't have to worry about me creating distress in you. Like, you've shown up here broken. Like, it's you're at the bottom, babe. If nobody told you, you are at the bottom. The only way is up. Like, and you can hang out here at the bottom with me forever if you want to. But like, there's the worst that's going to happen to you has happened. Like, you're living it right now. This is your bad. And so, but she's just very like, she doesn't try to change her. She doesn't try to talk her into settling. You know, she doesn't try to talk her into, excuse my French, but bullshit truce with Zeus. You know what I mean? Like, the things that we're kind of used to seeing in the story here in America, like, oh no, you've eventually got to make peace with Zeus. Zeus is the god of everything, and you're just gonna have to. And it's about, the story in some ways becomes about Demeter's will to just be like, I don't care, man. I don't care. I don't care what you come here and say. And I love Lemos is like, you heard her. She's not leaving. I mean, send whoever you want to. We're not going. And don't break the door because it's already on the hinge. You know what I mean? Like, just, thanks for coming and saying your piece. Nobody here cares. Nobody here is listening. Go. Look at the snow on your way out. Nobody's seen it before.
I love the spite. I love it so much.
Yes. Yeah. Like, just
the righteous spite is just dripping off the pages, and I'm here for it.
Yeah. I am too. It's so, you guys, if you haven't picked up on any of the Greek books that are floating around in the last, I mean, I feel like it's the last 10 years, but maybe it's just the last 5. You've really got to pick up one that doesn't just reiterate what's already been done. You've got to pick up one that tells the story from a different point of view or with a different voice, because I feel like this is what's been missing in America. I am painfully aware that this is not true everywhere else, but in America, one of the things that's been missing is, stories told in a woman's voice with real emotions that I think, and I don't think you have to identify as a woman to identify with the emotions in this story. I mean, I feel like you identified with the emotions in the story, but it's the first time we've really heard this story where Hades isn't a major character, and because at some point in this story, Hades' kidnapping of Persephone, or of Persephone's willingness to go. I mean, like, choose your poison on how that gets retold. But that it becomes about that. And it becomes about Demeter's grief. And it almost feels flat. Like, yeah, Demeter's just mad and she's sad.
Yeah.
And she can't stay.
I think a lot of the Hades and Persephone stories, and there are a lot of them, and there are some that I like and there are some that I can go without.
Sure.
I think a lot of them turn Demeter into a villain, especially the ones that are like, she went down there by herself, she's taking control. I think they are like, it's so easy to turn her into like a mad controlling mom. Whereas I felt like, even when I always read it, I was like, oh, I feel really bad for her.
Right. Like, her kid's missing. Like, is there, I mean, like, I have to tell you, funnily enough, we lost our kid in Greece. On the island of Rhodes.
Only for about an hour.
Right. We won't go into the story in depth, but when your kid is missing, you feel like you perhaps will die. Like, you perhaps will.
There's no thought of anything else. Right.
Like, you're just going to be like, okay, well, I'm just running through the alleys of this island now, but at any time I could literally just drop dead. Like, I'm not even, there's no real thought process. There's only just move your body, find your kid process. And it's so deep and it's so raw. And I do think when I was a child and we were reading Greek myths, and my mom read them all to us, I mean, all that she could get her hands on, I feel like Demeter wasn't always a bad guy in the 70s. Like, Demeter goes through this transformation of kind of Harpy Bad Shrew Mom. Sometime, I feel like I was a young adult, like maybe in my teen years or maybe in my 20s. So sometime in the 1990s, the story shifts and it's all about Persephone growing into her own power, that her mom was like the worst helicopter mom in the history of everything and had tried to keep her down. And I think, listen, I'm all about reclaiming and I'm all about the retell, but Demeter really did go through this phase where she was the bad mom who was really killing Persephone or Core.
Yeah.
That, you know, Persephone could have just as easily been suffocated and died if Hades didn't kidnap her and let her become, you know, the dark shining one on the Queen of Hell kind of persona that she was clearly born to be. But it's interesting because to me, and again, I can only talk about the American stories because I can't read Greek to save my life. I think I've proven that by pronouncing all the Greek names differently every time I say them today. But it's almost like here in America, the only way Persephone could step into her power is if she ate her mother. You know what I mean? Like
not literally.
But I mean, there could be no story where Demeter's a good mom and Persephone still walks into herself and her power. Like we had to tear down Demeter and destroy her and make her the worst aspects of motherhood and the worst aspects of selfish, narcissistic behavior. She's willing to kill everyone. All of Greece must die. And Demeter doesn't care. In order for Persephone to bloom and become herself. And I just have to tell you, that's a lot of garbage. Like you don't have to destroy the mom to become yourself. Right. And I'm not saying there aren't narcissistic parents out there in the world, because there are, but
it's just no, not that. It just occurs to me that some elements of that, it's kind of like the Cinderella story.
Yes, very much so.
You know,
and I just
the mother figure bad,
right? The evil stepmother.
Prince is good.
The prince is the only thing that can save her.
Yeah.
There's also, and as I understand, as you've told it, Ariana, when the daughter has been wrongfully removed from this mother's space, from this relationship, that it in this telling, I don't see that it was that she left on her own accord. And when the child is wrongfully removed from the mother's space, there's a kind of madness that like the sense of whether it's that they're lost for 15 minutes in the grocery store or an hour on vacation or for life, there's this kind of I think I agree that I feel like also the retellings of Demeter that she's selfish, right? That she's selfish, that she's withdrawn this, as opposed to that she is deeply and inherently grieving in a way that is so she's a goddess, so everything is going to be on a huge scale, and so that this is her madness at at being separated from her child.
I feel like a lot of the depictions of Demeter being just like cruel and callous and cold are the idea that the gods are just petty and they're just always one-upping each other, and they're always just, oh, well, you hit me, so I'm going to hit you back. And it's a very like cardboard cutout, two-dimensional type character that plays out in Greek mythology all the time. And like the original myths, I love them, but they don't give a lot of depth, really. Like there's not really a lot of emotions. Like there's like one thing and it's like, I'm angry at you because you did this to hurt me, so I'm gonna hit you back. And so I think that's a lot of where that, I guess, personification of Demeter comes off as not being like, you know, I guess her feelings being valid is like, well, the gods are just petty, and so she just feels, you know, slighted. Yeah. So it, and yeah.
I do, like, that's it. Like, I think that one thing that I enjoy a lot of different things about this story. I feel like we've spent an hour talking about what I enjoy about the story. But I think one of the things that I really like about it is their emotions are so raw in both of them. In Demeter and in Lemos, I feel like, and they're both like, yeah, I can see that. I think I'd probably feel that way. Yeah, I think that, no, I don't think we're having an over the top response. The snow was weird, but I don't think we're having an over the top response to what's happening here. You know what I mean? And I think Lemos is kind of like, I just love how, like, with everybody starts showing up to try to talk to Meter into coming back and to being cool with Persephone being gone, and Lemos is just like, what? I mean, like, did you fall on your head on your way here? Like, aren't you embarrassed to be here at the door behaving this way? You know, because that's the one thing that I don't remember from the retellings that I've read before. Like, the messengers show up and they're like, hey, come on, pack your stuff. Don't be this person. But none of them feel ashamed or embarrassed about the role they're playing in basically demonizing a mother's grief. You know, like, they're all like, hey, selfish lady, nobody can eat. There hasn't been a sacrifice to Apollo in months. Get it together. You know, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I wonder how much of that is because, you know, in America, this isn't our oral tradition. You know, there's no oral, I think there's a lot to be said for oral stories that are passed down generation to generation, because sometimes those are the emotions that get lost when we put them on paper. Like, we don't understand the ancestral depth of a particular story because you know, paper is paper. You read it in your voice. You know,
And that is a line that's been lost from the ancient works. Did you fall on your head?
Yes, it is. I to you, that was definitely in there. It's just been lost in translation. But I do feel, you know, when a storyteller is telling a story around a fire at night, there's a lot of emotion in it. There's a lot of passion in it that you won't necessarily get on the page, especially if it's translated very badly and very mechanically. So it's like a word for word translation instead of what did this sentence really mean? You know, if you're talking about pride, it always comes back to, for me, it always comes back to the Iliad's actual title is The Wrath of Achilles. You know, and I'm just like, you know, if you just presented it as The Wrath of Achilles, I'd walk in with a better understanding of what's going on. Because, you know, depending on what translation you read, Achilles kind of seems like a real, like, so somebody stole your slave girl. Get yourself together. Like, how attached could you really be to her? When did you know, I know you've been here for a decade or so, but like, didn't you just pick her up last month? Like, how, really? I mean, really? But when you go into the story like, hey, Achilles isn't mad. Achilles is like tear apart the earth mad. And not just about his bounty of war being stolen, but a whole plethora of things that had been slowly piling up. You're kind of like, oh, hang on a second. The Iliad is about pride and anger. Okay. I kind of missed that in the badly translated Fitzgerald version. You know, you do.
So I was scrolling back to look. There's a particular line that you wrote, Ariana, that I was trying to look for because when Heather said that the lines that hooked her were the very beginning, I was like, yes, me too. And when it started, and I realized after I Googled like who you were writing about, I was like, oh, bold choices. How are we going to make this going to be the
Right?
somehow like we're going to relate to the goddess of famine? And this is it. Hunger has no selective affliction. Even the greatest king still feels its pangs at times.
Yeah.
So I think that is one of the other great things that you've done here is you've taken an undesirable
Right.
like, and it makes me think of how many times Heather and I have talked about the various like the duality of two different sort of faces of a goddess or something, and
Right.
that you've made it immediately relatable. Okay, well, we don't have to talk about like scorch the earth famine here. You've been hungry
Right.
before, right? Like,
Right. You went to bed without dinner, didn't you? Because you
yeah,
were too tired or it didn't work out or you burnt it all to hell and you were like, I don't have the energy to do this again. And you picked up the orange and it was bad. So we were like, we're just not eating.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Really, you had to eat 3 times a day. And Louise and I do talk about this. Like,
Why?
that's an outrageous amount of
It's a lot.
time to have to make food to eat. And when the kids were little, I was like, yes, of course we do. We're making food 3 times a day and we're having 2 snacks a day and we're just rotating fluid and medication. And then finally we get to fall asleep on top of the laundry we swore we would put away today, but that's over. And
That's a
so,
lie.
but now that the kids are grown and I'm like, oh, sweet mother of God, we have to eat breakfast. I cannot. Everybody have yogurt. It doesn't matter that you can't eat yogurt today. I cannot, there cannot be all this constant cooking and all this constant providing of food.
And that acknowledging is a place of enormous privilege, right? And the
Oh,
fact
gosh,
that while I don't know what it's like to go days and days and days hungry, I did have food before I went to school. I never went
right.
except for in high school where I needed to feed myself breakfast and I didn't. But
Right.
but we do know what hunger feels like, and
Sure.
it's a thing like everybody knows what it's like to feel sad. Not
Yes.
everybody knows what it's like to feel the depth of grief or despair from a major traumatic
Loss.
event or
Mhm.
or loss of a loved one. I remember there was a class I was involved in one time where I asked the group of young people, like, how many of you have lost an immediate family member? And out of 100, there were like 10, and I was like,
Right.
oh, that's right, you haven't gotten to that part yet.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
okay. And so but so you have taken this sort of epic goddess of destruction, this
Right.
undesirable, and made her immediately relatable at the
Yeah.
most
Agreed.
everybody knows. And so
Even kings. Yeah.
even
Even the
kings.
most privileged.
So I felt
there.
like I wanted to lift that up, that was such a incredible,
Yeah.
simple,
Thank
and
you.
relatable thing that no matter what, like all the things that come after that, you're like, oh, but I still, and so that also means that I, as the reader, can't other her.
Right. Right. You
You're
can't.
like, oh man, you're right.
Oh man,
Yeah.
I can't.
Even if you want to, you're just like, oh shit.
Oh
Yeah. I'm gonna relate to her.
She's
even if I
got me
don't want
there.
to.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And I think
yeah.
that's part of the hook of this story is
I was
that
like,
you can't be like, oh no, you know what? I hate her. I don't want a goddess of
I don't
famine.
want to relate
Yeah.
to this. This is
Yeah.
like,
Well, I would say too, Ariana, that's one thing in your writing period that I think you do a great job of getting into the character and bringing
Yeah.
that character to life.
Bringing
and
the
was,
hook that hooks you, even if it's a character you're like, no, man.
And that was one thing present in your story from Musings of the Muses. So what was it? The Rebellion of Arachne of Lydia. I don't remember the whole title, but
I think you might have come close to nailing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's another word in there too, but yeah.
Yeah.
But you did such a good job in there with the characters. I loved that story. And so when I heard that, you were looking at having us publish another novella based on Greek myth, I'm like, yeah, we have to do it.
Yeah.
You have a really great job of capturing the characters, getting into their minds and emotions and presenting them to us. the reader immediately relates. So, and I look forward to seeing what you're doing next.
Thank you.
Yeah. I do too. Well, we've gone about an hour, which seems, I just feel like I'm just waking up to the story. But
so before we run out of time, would you like to do a reading?
Nah.
It's up to you. You don't have to.
I think we're gonna skip. Do you want to skip the reading, Ariana?
Yeah, I think we're gonna skip the reading right now.
Yeah, let's skip the reading. I forgot you weren't in the room when I asked her already. But sorry.
But also, is there anything that you would like to say to your readers out there, the people that are future readers and people who are reading it right now, or who have read it?
Oh gosh. I think the most important thing that I wanted to say to you guys is thank you. Oh my gosh. You guys have said so many nice things about my book. And I was like, oh my gosh, they actually like it. There's always that little thing in your head that's like, they're going to hate it. They think you suck. But like, it's always nice to be affirmed.
It is.
I guess for the most part, just like, I'm not writing a lot recently. A lot of it is because I'm in an MFA course. So all of my time is devoted to writing scripts for my MFA. But I'm ready to get back in the saddle at a moment's notice. I have a YA like contemporary fantasy thing. I'm like trying to like plug away at. It's probably a bajillion short stories I want to work on. I'm available on Instagram. I'm available on Twitter or whatever they're calling it now.
Right.
But yeah, I'm just really thankful that you guys have all enjoyed it so much, and I'm very thankful for Bridget's Gate for allowing me to share this story with the world.
It was our pleasure. And I know that this is a lot of things that a lot of authors don't like to hear, but I look forward to a 2-star review. And here's why. And Steve will tell you this. I buy more books from 1 and 2 and 3-star reviews than I do 4 and 5-star reviews. Because the one thing I'll tell you is when you get a 2 or 3-star review, the one thing that they do is they outline what they didn't like about the story. And I love that because that's usually where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a story I want to read. I do want a sapphic love story with devastation and famine. I did not know that about myself until reading this sentence, but I'm in it. So I know that authors don't hold out for the 2-star review, but I'm waiting for it. So, because I always feel like when people express their true opinions about a book, it helps the reader either go, oh, you know what, that isn't going to be a book for me, which is great because then they're not going to buy it and be disappointed. But also it helps the reader who's like, hold on, this is the book for me. I do want to read a love story about famine and the goddess of harvest. I didn't know that about myself until just now, but I'm all about that.
The reviews aren't for me; they're for other people that are
right. That's right. They're never for the author. I always try to.
I like reading them. Don't get me wrong.
Right. I always try to tell the authors, don't respond, man. Don't fall for it. But
it's a trap.
The best books have 1-star reviews.
That's true.
And when you get a 1-star review and you're feeling some type of way about it, one thing that I did to help me get past my devastation for my 1-star review, my first one, was I looked at my main comp title, which at the time, as I was looking, it was Song of Achilles. And I found a 1-star review for Song of Achilles, and it was scathing. And I was like, you know what?
She's a great
company. I am in great company.
Speaking of Song of Achilles, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you ever, as an author, are like, oh my gosh, I don't know why I'm doing this. Nobody likes anything I write. Go look up the reviews for anything Shirley Jackson did. I think Shirley Jackson's average is 3.1, like across all books. Crazy. I don't think Shirley Jackson has.
Yeah, and I know, using that as an example, the lottery. I can't tell you how many people that I've been in a conversation with. Like, oh, I hate that story.
Oh, I know.
It's awful. I hate the ending.
Story rules.
Like, it is so powerful, but
right. But that's what you want. I think as a publisher, what I want is for people to have strong feelings, whether they're really good, strong feelings, or really like, oh my God, strong feelings. Right. I really want you to have strong feelings, and I'm really comfortable with you sharing them. I do not like death threats, but I do
No.
like strong feelings. Right. But I do feel like, and I feel like,
Well, and as a reader too, if I look up a book on Amazon and it only has 5-star reviews, my first reaction is I don't believe it.
he won't buy
No.
it. He won't buy it. He's
This is
like,
faked.
he's
You know
like,
what I mean?
there's 300 reviews and they're all 4 and 5 stars. Nobody's
Yeah.
hated this book. I can't read
Yeah,
this book.
they were all paid off.
Right.
I just want you
Right.
to know, Heather, that, Heather, when Heather sent me your book, she said it's a Greek retelling and you're going to love it. Like that was it, which we
Right,
have a
that's all I told
shorthand.
her. Right.
We have a shorthand, so that's fine. Like
And she
that's
was
right.
right.
But I would have read it even faster if she would have said, this is a sapphic love story and the goddess of famine is a main character. I would have been
Right.
like, say less.
Say less. You had me at sapphic and you nailed it at famine. So,
Right.
I mean, like, that's the thing. So, no, but did you want to say something, Ariana, when I cut you off?
Oh, it was just because MJ mentioned Song of Achilles, and I just wanted to say that, speaking of Madeline Miller, I was on like a 6-hour flight because I was going across the ocean, and I picked up Circe from the bookstore, and I read that thing throughout I devoured that thing. And it was so good.
It is so good. But, I mean, like MJ makes a good point. She's got more than 1 star. She's got more than just one-star review, and that's the thing. And I can't help but think how many people bought that book based off a 1-star review that they read that was really detailed. Like I feel like, guys, that's when you're winning as an author. I'm not sure that's true, but I feel like when you're winning as an author is when you get that 3-star review that's like, man, I just had to skim the last 50 pages. Yeah. Like I couldn't even dig into all of it for the following reasons.
Yeah. And I'll say this to you, Ariana, I've said this to other authors and take it to heart. If you get a 1-star review, especially if it's more than just 2 words or one little sentence.
Right.
If they actually sat down and wrote a paragraph or 2, keep this in mind. You moved that reader so hard that it felt to write that.
That they took 20 minutes out of their day to write 3 paragraphs of why they did not like the story. I mean, I try to tell our authors, do not read your reviews. Don't do it. I know everybody does, but don't do it. It's the thing that crazy making is made out of. But
well,
but it
works for theater too. I used to do perform, and I had somebody leave one of my shows one time and came back and says, Carolyn or Louise, I'm so sorry that I left, but I just couldn't. And I was like, tell me more about why you couldn't. Like,
I want to explore
why
you were so uncomfortable. Right.
Yeah. I made you that uncomfortable. Oh my gosh, that's so exciting.
I'm winning as an actor.
Why don't you like me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a wrap up. We have to go eat dinner.
Yes.
Most importantly. Well, happiest of book launch days. Food for Thought can be found anywhere books are for sale, ebooks or paperback books. So make sure you pick up your copy. It'll be 99 cents for a few more days till the weekend. The ebook will be 99 cents until this weekend, and then it'll magically go up to its regular price. So if you want to pick up the ebook, it's a fast read, but it is a phenomenal read that will stick with you for a long time after.
I am ready with my 5-star review. Like just after all of this discussion of 1-star reviews, I am prepared.
You're prepared to leave your review soon. I look forward to it. But okay, guys. Well, you have a fantastic night. Congratulations, Ariana.
Thank you.
It's a really
thank you for having me.
Story. Yeah.
Thanks everybody for showing up.
Yeah. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Good night.